Cool. So, welcome everybody. Again, it seems a bit weird welcoming everyone when we've been chatting for the last 10 minutes or so. Yep, again, it's fantastic to have you all along. Like we said, please have all questions going to panelists and attendees. And feel free to keep typing in those questions as we go, and we'll respond to them as we go through this. So yeah, the government obviously announced that very soon we're going to be going down to level 3, and I think this webinar is good timing for that. So yeah, we're gonna learn some tricks on the website to help plan future atlasing.
Yeah, so as Mike says, one of the things we're going to talk about is using the Atlas portal to plan your Atlas trips once we're able to travel again. So to be able to plan your trips, we need to know what Atlas grid squares people have visited already and have submitted checklist data for. And the place to see this information is the Atlas effort map. It's in the Atlas portal, and it's where participants can go and you can see the collective atlasing efforts. You can see what grid squares still need to be surveyed. So I'll just share my screen with you guys. And so here we have the New Zealand Bird Atlas portal. So we need to open this up first. And then to get to the effort map, we just need to go to Explore up the top here. So we'll just click on that. And then this opens up the Explore page. There's a number of different things that you can look at on the Explore page. So there's species maps, you can explore Atlas regions, and Dan's going to talk a wee bit about that stuff. You can explore media, and there's a few other things as well. But what I'm going to show you is the Atlas effort map. So we'll just click on that one. It's going to take us to the Atlas effort map. So you can see here we've got a map of New Zealand and the associated islands as well. And over top of this, we've got the Atlas grid squares, which you can't see zoomed all the way out. So we'll just zoom in a bit further. So I'm just zooming in with the mouse, but you can also write a place name up the top. So however you want to zoom in. And you can start to see all the Atlas grid squares starting to pop up there. So from this map, you can get a summary of the total survey effort within each of the individual grid squares. So I'll just zoom in a wee bit here and show you how to do that. So for example, the square here in Blenheim, it's gone a bit funny. So if I click on that, you'll see that each grid square has its own individual name, so that pops up, and then you also get the total diurnal efforts that have been put into that square, the nocturnal effort hours, the number of complete checklists which have been submitted to that square, the number of species which have been observed, and whether that grid square is incomplete or complete in terms of surveying effort. So that just gives you a summary of the information in that square, but you can also get more information. So if we go into view all grid square data, I'll just open that up in a new tab. You can get a lot more information about the data that's been submitted to that square. So you can see the species which have been submitted, you can see more about the checklists and the number of atlases and things like that. So that's something you can have a look at yourselves if you're interested, but for now we'll just go back to the Atlas effort mapping and just talk a wee bit more about that. So as I described, if you click on each of the individual squares, then you'll get a summary of the accumulated effort in each grid square. But also when data is submitted to the Atlas, the squares will become coloured. So we'll see over here in the Richmond Hill Forest Park, there's no colour over top of the square. And it's because there's not been any data submitted to that square. So if I click on it, you can see that there's no data in that square. Whereas this coloured yellow square beside it has got about 4 effort hours into that square. Also, the more effort hours put into the square, the darker they're going to become. So the square over here, we see it's got about 10 hours, and these really dark ones over here, we've got about 43 diurnal effort hours into that grid square. So by clicking on these squares and looking at the colour of the square, or if there is no colour on the square, you can really quickly see which grid squares have data in them and the ones which still need surveying, which, as I said, is those ones that don't have colour over top of them. Another really cool thing about this effort map is that it updates regularly. So as participants are entering their data into the atlas, it'll be updating, but there is a slight lag. So there's an almost real-time update on the survey efforts into the atlas, which makes this atlas effort map a really important resource for observers to determine which squares that still need to be surveyed. And this is something that wasn't available for the previous atlases, so this is a pretty cool thing that we've got for this one. It also highlights how important it is to make sure that you are submitting your data into the Atlas portal, so that's either on your phone, so in the app, or on the website, so that observers can see what squares have been surveyed and where people need to go to collect more data. So with the New Zealand Bird Atlas, the general aim is to detect all the possible species within each grid square over each of the 4 seasons, both during the day and at night. So there's a few important things with this aim, so I'm just going to break that down a bit and talk you through those. So firstly, we're aiming to detect all the possible species within each grid square, so in each one of these squares. So how we're going to need to do this is to survey all the major habitat types within each grid square, so carry out complete checklists and each of the major habitat types within each of these squares. And when we're talking about habitat types, that could be farmland, it could be rivers, native habitat, things like that. So to be able to see the different habitat types, you just zoom into the map. You want to have it on satellite view as well, or hybrid works as well, because you can see the place names. You can just zoom in and you can see different habitat types. So this is something Dan and Pat will talk a wee bit more about, so I won't get into too much details about doing the habitat types. But there's also a seasonal effort component to the atlas, so we want to get a seasonal picture of the bird distribution and movements in New Zealand. So each grid square needs to be surveyed each season. And by this we mean this is a collective seasonal effort across the 5 years. So for example, it's a collective winter effort across the 5 years, not 5 individual winters that you have to go into the squares and collect data. So another great thing about this Atlas effort map is that you can see the seasonal breakdown for each of the seasons. So just up the top here where it says date, at the moment it's set for year round, so this is the data that's been submitted for the whole year. But if we click on this, you can then go into each season and see the breakdown for those seasons. So we'll just go into autumn here, and it's just the same map, but it's just showing us all the autumn, a summary of the autumn total survey effort. So at the moment, we've just had 1 year of, well, we're still in the first year of the Atlas, but once we move into years 2 to 5, more data will be added into this Atlas. So once we get into the second autumn, that data will accumulate into these squares rather than the map resetting itself. So hopefully that all makes sense, but we'll have time for questions later. And then thirdly, we want to survey the grid squares during both the day and at night. And another great thing about this Atlas effort map is that you can look at both the daylight survey efforts as well as nighttime survey efforts. So just up the top here where it's Atlas effort, at the moment you can see that I'm set on diurnal effort hours. So this is showing the survey efforts during the day in autumn. You can also switch that to nocturnal checklists as well. So when you're looking at this map, you want to make sure that you're selecting the season that you're in or that you're wanting to plan your trips for, as well as setting the time of day that you're planning to go out, so that you can plan to go to these areas where there isn't any survey efforts so far. And remember that this map is updating in close to real time, so what you see on the map is what's been surveyed pretty much up to date right now. So as Atlas participants, you're free to choose which of these grid squares that you want to survey, but we do encourage you to prioritise surveying the grid squares that don't have any data in them, so these grid squares that aren't coloured in, so that we can get data from all the grid squares. But it's also important to remember that you can survey other grid squares as well, especially these yellow grid squares. Quite a lot of them might only have one checklist in them or only a few, and they might not have surveyed all the habitat types. So for example, this one here has only had one checklist, so that one still needs a bit more survey effort before it can be classed as complete. And additionally, you can add do checklists for squares that have this high effort data as well. The more data is great. It's all really worthwhile for the atlas. So once you have selected the grid square that you would like to survey, you can then map out the major habitat types within that square, and then you can choose how you would like to survey them. So that's either with travelling counts or stationary counts, and how long the checklist is, it's up to you, but stay within our guidelines of 5 to 6 minutes. Also, if you're doing a travelling count, how far you travel is up to you, but just don't go more than about 1 kilometre long. So Pat's going to take you through a bit through an example on how you might survey an individual grid square and the habitats within that. But first, Dan's just going to show you some ways that you can select grid squares to survey. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Yep, sweet. Just bring up mine. Okay, so fingers crossed that is sharing my screen now. Is that coming up, guys?
Yep.
Yep.
Sweet, thanks Sam. Yeah, so Sam's kind of covered the Atlas effort map quite extensively there, and I am going to be talking about sort of 6 tools or 6 ways for selecting grid squares, looking at effort, how much effort's gone in, and sort of helping you tailor your atlasing efforts and adventures and sort of going forward. Some of you may already know quite a lot of these, but for the others, you know, some of these might be really, really new. And so our hope is that we can show you something different and something new here to help you with your Atlas planning and provide different ways to meet the Atlas challenge. Basically what I'm going to show you, I'm just going to bring this up. So the 6 options that I'm going to discuss are the Atlas effort map. I'm just going to touch on a few extra bits, but Sam's done a great job of covering most of that. And we're going to talk about exploring regions. We're going to talk about creating species maps. Again, Pat touched on that last week. We're going to talk about target species, the submit map as an extra resource, and also topographic maps. So those are the 6, and I'll summarize that at the end. But for now, let's get cracking. So most of these are within the Explore function on the Atlas portal. For those struggling, I've seen in the chat, some people are sort of struggling to find this. So this is online. This is in an internet browser. This isn't on the app. And it's ebird.org/Atlas New Zealand. And that's where you go. If you're wondering, you'll see the New Zealand Bird Atlas portal logo in the top left-hand corner, then you know. And also, when you go to Explore, you'll see that there's an Atlas effort map. So let's crack on with the first one, which is the effort map. Again, as Sam's already covered most of this, I'm really going to zip through this, just a few extra key points. And yeah, just reiterate, this is an immensely valuable tool. And for those on the webinar today who were involved in previous atlases, this is probably mind-blowing to have this constant feedback, because nothing like this was available in the previous atlases. Whilst it may not be absolutely perfect, and there's definitely a few hiccups and little tweaks that need to be done, it's leaps and bounds ahead of what was available. So you can use this, and we all use it here at the Atlas team for our own personal and sort of when we've gone out as groups before, obviously, the whole lockdown. It's a really, really valuable tool. Sam's already talked about diurnal effort hours and nocturnal. I just want to talk about a few extra little bits. When you click on it, you might see something different. Your map might come up initially as like terrain or street, but it remembers your preferences every time. So I always usually have it as hybrids. That's just on the right-hand side here where it says map type. Hybrid just shows you the satellite imagery. You're then going to be able to look at the different habitats much, much easier, and whilst also being able to see place names and road names. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just on Kaikoura here, just to illustrate a few points. So again, that seasonal component, remember this drop down, so that at the minute what we're seeing is the year-round effort. But if you click on this drop down here, it says date, you get all of the seasons. So just to go over those seasons again, so the winter is June until August, spring, September, November, summer, December to February, autumn is March to May. So that's how we've split those. The dates are within the handbook and they're actually on the portal as well, the specific dates. But let's just have a look at, say, the winter effort in Kaikoura. And as Sam's already explained, this is diurnal effort hours, so this is all the birding that's gone on during the day. We can flick that over to nocturnal effort hours and immediately you can see the difference. So, you know, thinking of going forward in the winter, you know, popping down to Kaikoura, hopefully obviously once we're out of lockdown and down to a sufficient level, we can then sort of say, well, you know, I could tailor my atlasing and do more nocturnal checklists in and around this area because I know that there's a paucity of data in and around that area. Two further points to this that are really, really interesting as well. Again, kind of tailoring your atlasing. So let's look at the number of complete checklists in this area. On the right-hand side, when you select this, it changes to different keys for this. So you've got complete checklists. As it sort of progresses from a faint yellow all the way up to blue, you're going up the number of checklists. So just because a square is coming up as yellow doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't go back in there, because it could mean that, as Sam's pointed out, there could only be one checklist there. There could only be 5, which actually in the grand scheme of things is not very much effort at all. It could be like 25 minutes of birding collectively. So again, another way to have a look at, you know, say you lived in Kaikoura and you want to sort of have a look around here, you can see that, oh, okay, I probably need to be going into these squares and bumping up that data. The final one on the Atlas effort map as well, which I think a lot of people kind of look over, is species observed. Again, a really useful tool. Again, the key changes from, you got this light aqua blue all the way up to this deep red, and that's the number of species observed. The way that you could use this is looking at squares and kind of seeing, there's only sort of 1 to 10 species there, but I know that there's a multitude of habitats, and so I need to go and increase the species list for that grid square. So again, another really, really useful tool. And as Sam's already pointed out, this is going to be really important moving forward over time as we sort of see certain areas, certain grid squares that aren't receiving a lot of information. And we can kind of use these tools to kind of see, okay, what do we need? Do we need to put more nocturnal effort into that? Do we need to sort of be prioritizing looking for certain species, which I'm going to touch on in a bit. This is immensely valuable and will continue to be even more valuable as we sort of progress through this Atlas scheme. Again, in terms of sort of creating a map, you could press print screen on your laptop keyboard and then sort of share this with your phone or your tablet to then use out and kind of know which grid squares you want to be looking at. You could print it out and make notes on it if you wanted to. So that's number 1, is the Atlas effort map. The second one that we're going to discuss, going back to the explore function, so hit explore on the top tab here. The second one that we're going to be talking about is exploring Atlas regions. Now you'll notice as I go through these that they're all intimately linked and kind of some sort of even more so with each other. And especially with exploring Atlas regions, it's different ways of showing the same information or gaining the same kind of picture, but different things will work for different people. Atlas regions is really great because you can look at a specific grid square, you can look at a county, a region, or even the whole of New Zealand. Again, there are a few tweaks in here and hiccups that we found. By all means, if you want to provide us with some constructive feedback that we can forward to Cornell, because we are talking with them, and there are a few things that we're going to be talking about when we next chat with them, feel free. But again, this is a whole heap of really, really valuable information for all of you at the touch of a button. So this is something that I don't personally use a lot, but I know that others do. So, but we're going to touch on this now. I'm going to go ahead and type Marlborough in here. and you'll see that it drops down. I'm going to select Marlborough, and then you get this summary page for the region, which is really, really nice. You get the number of total checklists, number of atlases, you get the total number of grid squares, how many have received data. You can see that nearly 84% of grid squares have got data. That's pretty good. But remember, you got this, at the minute we're doing a year-round effort, and we kind of want to do that seasonal. We want to be looking at those seasonal pictures. So let's have a look at spring in Marlborough. Click set. And again, so then you're getting the spring picture. Number of checklists, number of atlases, grid squares with data, number of species observed as well. Quick tip here is for this species list, what this is doing is showing all of the species detected in Marlborough and the number of grid squares that they were found in. If you double click on this, on grid squares with species, it orders it for you. So you can have a look at the most common species in Marlborough at the minute for spring. This is black-backed gull, followed by chaffinch and welcome swallow. This is really interesting and a really, really good tool for something I'm going to show you in a minute. But again, this review page, as Sam said, check it out. It's really, really useful. And something that I'm then going to show you is if you click on counties, the counties tab here, just next to overview, that then splits it. Because Marlborough only has Marlborough district, you'd only see one, but with, say, Wellington, you'd have Kapiti Coast all the way down to sort of Wellington City. I'm going to show that in a minute. But it also gives you, number of species and amount of effort hours, again, for this spring component. You can change this at any time just using that drop-down menu. So let's click on Marlborough district. And again, you get, it's the same information because there's only one district in Marlborough, but you'll see here that it's changed. Next to overview, it says grid squares. So if you click on grid squares now, excuse me, you get a list of all of the grid squares within the region and within this district, sorry. Again, you can click on here to sort these, very similar to the Atlas effort map. So you've got diurnal hour effort, nocturnal hour effort, number of species and number of complete checklists. Again, reiterating the importance of complete checklists. That's not incidentals, it's complete. So let's click on that and it sorts it by diurnal hour effort. So then that is a really, really quick way for you to kind of see, oh, in spring, there's heaps of grid squares, all of these grid squares that don't have any data in them for Marlborough in the spring period. So I'm just going to click on one that I know, and that's CA55. It's got no data in it at all. It's actually received no data as of yet. And you get this summary page for the grid square. At the minute, it'll say 0 checklists, 0 atlases, 0 species. There's nothing in there. What it shows here as well is sort of a very sort of snapshot map of the region, of that grid square, sorry. And so you can use this to kind of gauge on where the Atlas effort map it is. We're going to sort of provide some feedback to Cornell and ask if potentially, if you click on this, it takes you to the grid square on the effort map, but that's not available at the minute. So if you click on this, all it does is refresh the page. So it's a slight, well, it's not really a massive hindrance, but it's just something, it's a nice to have. Anyway, so we're at this point, and then we could go back to the effort map if we wanted to have a look at this grid square and go there. So that's one way. If you wanted to go back, rather than having to hit back and all that kind of stuff, you can see the blue titles here that are underlined, and when you highlight them, so you can go back all the way to New Zealand if you wanted to, or you could go back to Marlborough or different counties. So now I've clicked on New Zealand. I've got this New Zealand, again, spring effort total. So we know that we've got over 13,000 checklists for spring effort for New Zealand, 388 atlases, some of you on this call, very likely. And what I wanted to show you is, again, you can have a look at the commonmost species at the minute, chaffinch and blackbird and starling. So all the introduced species are in most atlas squares across New Zealand in spring. But if you click on states and provinces, so that's a North American term, but it gives you all of the regions. And again, quick little tip here, just a nice thing to look at, is if you click on these, again, it sorts it by ascending or descending. So you can have a look at how many species. So at the minute, Canterbury for spring has the most number of species. You can have a look at effort hours. Again, Canterbury, 742 hours collectively so far in the spring period. As Sam said, it's a collective spring, it's a collective summer, autumn, and winter effort. So you have this collective seasonal effort. So that will just keep on going up. That's just a nice way to look at it. And again, possibly a competitive thing, but anybody sort of having a look at, oh yeah, no, we need to ramp up our spring effort or whatever. I'm gonna have a click on Wellington here just to show you quickly difference. Again, click on counties and just what I was talking about. You then have these splits in between the sort of districts. So we could click on Cryptic Coast if we wanted to, excuse me, and then click on grid squares. And again, that gives you the whole list of the grid squares within that Cryptic Coast district. Clicking on the top here, you can sort it however you wanted to. And you could pick a square. Let's pick one that's maybe got a little bit of effort data. So BS 69, and it gives you that summary. So you could use this to sort of say, well, I know that there are more species in this grid square than what is listed here. So I can tailor my efforts to go there. And you can use this map. Okay, it's around Otaki Beach or Waikawa Beach. So you could go in there and use that. So that is Explore Atlas Regions. I'm going to head back to the Explore tab. So we've covered the Atlas effort map, we've covered Explore Atlas Regions. The third one that I want to talk about and what I kind of touched on is species maps. Pat talked about this last week, so for those who were here, talking about looking at species range, but using a different portal. We're going to be using the Bird Atlas portal here and kind of having a look. And this is generating a rough gauge, and I emphasize rough. I'm sure some people will sort of say that it isn't accurate, and you're right, because it is a rough picture, but it still can be quite useful for gauging on where people have gone within grid squares and within Atlas regions. So I'm just going to create a map for a really common species. So again, going back to what I was talking about, that that list of within regions or across New Zealand, we know that chaffinch, blackbird, starling, they're really common species. So by using one of these, you use blackbird. Just note here that it gives you the entire global taxonomy, but that's fine. We'll just select Eurasian blackbird. That's going to load up a species map. And by creating these, you can kind of get, as I said, this rough gauge on where people have been submitting checklists. Rough. So you get this map. Again, if you don't see satellite imagery, just make sure to hit hybrid on the right-hand side and also show points sooner. And then what we're going to do is zoom right in onto New Zealand using the magnifying tool and then draw a box around New Zealand, and we'll zoom in real quick. And we're going to zoom in, and the purple should pretty soon turn into little blue dots. So we'll keep on zooming in. It'll just load. And immediately you can see the use of this already. So we're getting a gauge on all of the checklists, all of the points that people have been and seen blackbirds. Just remind anyone who's unsure, so blue dots are personal locations and orange are birding hotspots. And if it's sort of a bloom, it's an old birding hotspot. So if we go down here and you can kind of see, so let's have a look at just south of Greymouth. You can kind of get a gauge already, having a look at this, and I'm sure there's people being like, oh man, that'd be so useful. So you can see, let's have a look at this grid square here. So you can see that possibly you could tailor your efforts along this road, or maybe sort of more in along the coastal areas here. Looking at other grid squares, you could have a look and see which habitats, using the satellite imagery and using this to kind of gauge your efforts. Obviously, it's not going to work if you put in a predominantly coastal species, or say, you're wanting to look at coastal areas, but you're using something like blackbird. It's possibly not going to work. So kind of reiterating what I'm talking about here, it is a rough gauge, but it's potentially something that can be quite useful to looking at where people have been and what habitats or areas within a grid square haven't been covered, or a region, as you're sort of seeing here. So that is a really, really effective way by using one of the commonly encountered species to kind of get this outlook on where you could potentially tailor your efforts to. So that's something to think about. So that's number 3. So we'll go back to the Explore tab, moving on to number 4, which is Atlas Target Species. And this links in quite nicely with species maps. Something that quite a lot of people potentially overlook and don't sort of focus on, but it's a really, really quick and very, very easy way, again, to have a look at species that you are missing on your lists. So let's just click on target species now. And what it does is, as I said, it's very, very quick, it's very, very easy. So you can enter a grid square that potentially you are going to or you regularly go to. You can enter a county or even the whole of New Zealand if you wanted to. So let's type in Marlborough, somewhere where I've got some data. And then what it does as well is gives you an option to have a look at time of year. So it doesn't have the seasonal breakdowns, but you could easily do it with this custom tab. So let's have a look at the winter effort, for example. So let's go June to the end of August and just click on green button that says show target species. And what it does is you'll see it based on nearly 2,000 complete checklists. Again, the importance of complete checklists. It's saying that there are 31 species in Marlborough that I have not personally got on my atlas lists within the Marlborough region. And what it does is just provides you with this list and the sort of likelihood or frequency that they've been detected. So they're quite small frequencies, but the amazing thing about this is that, you know, I could have a look at this and I want to go and detect, I want to go and find some South Island saddleback. You click on this map button, what does it do? It creates a species map for you, which is ace. Really, really useful, and particularly for those really, really restricted species you can kind of see. And again, using that magnifying tool, I can zoom in and I can say, okay, so if I want to go and detect those and get on my personal list, I need to be prioritizing Blue Mine Island, Long Island, and the Sounds. So again, I'm sure potentially people haven't been able to use this tool or even sort of looked at it, but this is really, really useful. And again, you could use a grid square. So let's say, let's pick a grid square in Marlborough. So let's maybe do CA 59 or something. So you can list, it gives you a whole heap of different ones as well, but let's go on CA 59 Marlborough, and again, show target species. And so I haven't put a lot of information into that grid square, if any. Oh no, so I have. So in CA 59, sorry, I've put in 34 species, but there's still potentially 84, 87, I can't read, 87 that I could put in there. And again, gives you this really wicked list. So you can go through, you can click on the species if you want to sort of go on and have a look at photos or audio, if you want to sort of work on your idea of that species. And again, you could have a look at a map by clicking on map. So that is a really underused and underappreciated tool, possibly with a lot of people. So that's a really, really nice one to use. So let's go back to the Explore tab. So a lot of those have been based on sort of the collective effort for all Atlas participants across the country, within regions, within grid squares. Apart from that Atlas target species, it's kind of moving on to your own personal efforts. This next one is, yeah, it's kind of looking at your previously visited squares to see where you've been, and you can use this to kind of gauge where you've already been in a square and looking at other habitats that you could possibly prioritize. So it's not in the Explore function. So if you click on Submit, just as you would if you were submitting a checklist, click here, and where it's coming up with location, again, let's go with Marlborough. I do have a specific square that I think is a really good example. So I've typed in Marlborough, it brings up the map, which hopefully a lot of you will be now more familiar with. And then obviously if you were submitting a checklist, you'd go through, select your location. What I'm going to do is hit satellite imagery again, because I want to bring up that satellite imagery so I can have a look at the different habitats. And I'm going to actually full screen this. So I'm going to hit those 4 lines. And again, this is a really nice way to reiterate the importance of accurate locations. When you specifically put where you're standing for your stationary count or where you started your checklist for your traveling count, it automatically puts it into that sort of bang on to that map. You can then link that to sort of the habitat type around that with your with the satellite imagery and kind of get a better picture. Again, blue is your personal locations, orange are sort of public hotspots where lots of people have gone or lots of species are. If it has a plus in it, all it is so it's 2 locations. It's just because I'm so far zoomed out, essentially. So we're going to zoom in onto this grid square here. Try and go around back here. Okay, so this is CC61. So this is Redwood Paths. Pat started this tradition of doing this massive loop on his bike and doing as many grid squares as possible. And so I thought, yeah, I'll do it as well. It's an absolute mission. But you can see this loop. This is where we both have cycled at different points. But I'm going to focus in on this grid square because I didn't get as much time in it as I wanted. But this is a really good way to describe it. So you can already look at this and say, well, I want to go back to this grid square. And all of these person locations are where I've been. Now, looking at the satellite imagery, I can already ascertain that, and from memory as well, you know, this checklist, this checklist, this checklist, it's all vineyards, and this is all livestock pasture. So I've missed the river habitat, I've missed this estuary here, and I've missed the coastal habitat, and I've also missed going up into this sort of QE2 covenant. And we actually are trying to work with private landowners to see if we can get access into there, because there's some pretty good bush in there. But again, sort of, you know, you're using this to sort of say, well, I want to go back there and I want to, you know, prioritize going to some different habitats, building up that picture within the grid square. So I could say, well, I'm going to hop off and I'm maybe going to, you know, walk up the river for a K or 2 and then back to my bike, cycle down all the way and then hop back into the river again, walk down along the river, noting everything, doing some, you know, 1 kilometer section checklists all the way to sort of where the river meets the coast, and then potentially walk up the beach as well and do some 1 kilometer sections up there to try and build up this picture. And again, this is sort of going back to the Atlas aim, which Sam talked about as well, which is this general aim for each and every Atlas participant, which is to detect all of the possible species within all of the grid squares across all 4 seasons. And so common sense kind of says, well, I know that I need to be going to certain habitats to get certain species assemblages because they're not going to necessarily be at the coast or they're not going to necessarily be inland. And so this is another tool to really help plan your Atlas adventures. And as I say, I will be hopping on my bike and getting back down there and trying to fill in this square a bit better. It's just another tool, but worth noting that remember that this doesn't provide any seasonal aspect. So it's just your locations, just as you see them. So there's no way to sort of see that seasonal aspect. Something that we're potentially going to be talking to Cornell about. We're not sure if it's going to be possible, but whether we could have, you know, you could create your own personal Atlas effort map, which certainly would be beneficial, but it's not the end of the world that it's not available. Again, all of these tools are leaps and bounds ahead of what was available last time. So it's a work in progress. And as I say, there's a few obstacles, a few hiccups, but again, this is a really, really good tool to potentially tailor your efforts over certain days or looking at going back to certain squares. So that's the submit map. The final one I want to talk about is the topo maps. So we'll go back to the Atlas portal here, and I'm going to click on the About section here. So if you click on About, excuse me, while it loads. So we put a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of information into the portal. So if you haven't already, we highly recommend making yourself a good cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or even sitting down with a beer if you want to, and just really, really diving in. There's heaps of information here that we provided to try and give you as much support as possible. Talking about how to Atlas, you know, basics, Atlas essentials, the handbook and supporting material, all media releases. So Mike has done a few interviews. There's newspaper articles, magazine articles. There's also Atlaser profiles. So moving over the scheme, we're going to be interviewing certain Atlasers, and we've got Joe Dillon and I've forgotten his name now, but we've interviewed them, basically asking them about their Atlas experience. And then you also see webinars, and that's just provides you with links to all of the YouTube videos of all of the previous webinars as well. But for now, what I want to show you is in handbook and supporting material. So if you click on there and it'll load up. If you haven't had a read of the handbook, then by all means do, but we've covered a lot of what's in there through these webinars. So if you are more of a visual learner, feel free to watch the webinars. If you scroll down, it says grid square maps. So we'll just skim read this, but we recommend downloading Guru Maps. Pat's going to talk about this very, very soon. And the Atlas Grid. So if you have a GPS, or if you want to download it onto your phone for use with Guru Maps or for Google Earth, or onto your laptop, if you click on this blue link, what it does is it allows you to download the New Zealand Bird Atlas Grid. It's a GPX file. If this is going over your head, feel free to either ignore this or email us if you want us to explain it. But that's there available for you to download. But right at the bottom it says topographical maps of all grid squares are available for download too. Click on that. So Sam lost months of her life producing these maps. So for all 3,232 grid squares, Sam has produced a topographical map for them, which is ace. So if you click on this, you get all of the regions, and then you can go and download a topographical map for them. So I've come up with an example. Say I want to go to the Nelson Lakes once we're allowed to. Click on the Tasman region, and I know that I want to go to CG48. So I'm going to scroll down once it loads. I'm going to scroll all the way down to CG48. I'm going to click on CG48, and it's a picture file. But what it gives me is the topo map with the grid square boundaries on it, and that's available for me to download on my phone. I can print it off and write notes on it. But it also gives me a picture of where it sits within the Tasman region. And possibly, looking at other grid squares that I need to have a look at. So I could zoom in now just to check that this is all right. I know, yeah, sweet. I'm going to drive down here, park up, and then I'm going to walk in on Jameson Ridge track, and then up over this saddle. Okay, so potentially I want to be looking at this grid square as well, and this one over to the top right. So I'd also be looking at this map and seeing, okay, CG48. So I need CF48 and CF49 as well. So I could go and source those as well. And that's a really, really great resource, as I say, to sort of download, print off, and scribble notes on. And so with all of these tools, you now you've picked the grid squares that you want to look at, you've picked where you want to go, and you kind of then want to start thinking about what you're going to be doing. So Pat's going to describe that now, but just to summarize those 6 things, it was the Atlas effort map, to explore regions, species maps. You had the target species as well, using the submit map, and then you've got these topo maps. And now moving on to how you will be sort of surveying those grid squares, whether you're using stationary or travel counts. Pat is going to come up. He's got a great example, and he's going to run through that now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Cool, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I'm going to just run through a quick example of how we would go about surveying a grid square. I'm going to share my screen. Cool, so this example here, we're just going to go through as if a grid square there'd been no effort put into it yet. So I've just selected this BW72. It has actually had some effort, but I've decided it's a nice grid square because it's got a range of different habitat types in it. So first of all, I'd start off with an aerial photo of the grid square, which you can look at on either the Atlas effort map or the submit map, and then sort of zoom in and just go over it and sort of identify what the major habitat types are. So as you can see, there's obviously native forest up here, a lot of farmland. You've got a river here with some pretty exposed gravel riverbed. So you can see a bit of what looks like plantation forest here. And then obviously Greytowns down here. So you've got an urban environment and ones associated with that. The second step I would go to is taking a look at those topo maps that we've produced. This just helps identify where roads and public walking tracks are a lot easier than those aerial photos. So as you can see on this one, there's a a public walking track through dockland that goes up here. So that's covering all that native forest that we saw on the aerial photo. Other things you could note, you can see here, there's access down to the river here, so there's potential there to be able to survey the river. And then all through this farmland up here, there's plenty of public roads. So there we don't have to worry about getting access to private property or anything. We can just stick to the public roads and the public walkways and do our bird counts there. So the next thing to do would be either you could make a list or draw it on a map yourself, print it out, and decide where you're going to do these checklists. So on here I've just drawn out, so lines here indicate travelling checklists, and the crosses indicate point counts, stationary counts. So here I've just drawn on here, could potentially walk along this road and that would be surveying some farmland. And then you could come down to that access road and say survey 1 kilometre up the river and 1 kilometre down the river. In the urban environment, you could do a walk around the block doing a travelling checklist. You could do counts at your home, for example. And zooming in further, I noticed when I was looking at this that there were some urban parks, so you could go to an urban park and do a checklist. And then what also looked like some vineyards or orchards or something like that, and do counts there as well. As for the native bush, you could decide on your way you're going to drive and you're going to go do a walk up in the native bush. You might want to stop as you go and do a few counts to get a bit more of that farmland habitat. Or if as you're driving, you notice some other habitat that you might not have seen in the aerial photos, then you could stop there and do some counts there. We got that plantation forest there, and a public road running right alongside it. So not saying to go into the forest, but you could just stop on the roadside, get out of your car and do a count nearby. And then finally, you could have these points drawn on the topo map as well. So let's say we were going to go up and do that walk up the Mount Reeves track on this grid square. We could split that into 1 kilometre checklists. Here I've just sort of split it depending on, to me it looked like here it sort of crossed a bit of farmland, so I'd probably do a checklist there. And then you get up into some sort of regenerating native forest and do a travelling checklist as we go up there. And then as the track winds up, you seem to get into more mature native forest, and so do a checklist here. And this sort of leads me on to my next little section, because as you can see there, we're going up that track and we reach a point, just zoom in there, where we're going to cross a grid square boundary. And this is quite an interesting situation, and one we get asked about a lot. As you can see here, the tracks in this grid square that we just talked about, but then it's going to cross over into another one, then very briefly cross into another one, and finally into this grid square here. So this has been sort of problematic for some people. The app does actually show the grid squares on it, and you can view them, but you run into problems in areas like this where there might be limited or no cell phone reception. So what we are suggesting to people to do is to download Guru Maps. So this is a completely free app, and the really great benefit of it is that it's fully functional offline. The maps aren't super detailed, and you're not going to get really good topo maps on them or anything, but they are detailed enough to an extent that, as you can see here, it's showing the track, and so you could have Guru Maps even if there was no cell phone reception. You could be doing your checklists offline on your phone through the app and tracking where you are in relation to the grid squares. So in this case, I'd be stopping that checklist right by the grid square boundary, and then as I enter into this one, starting a new one, doing a checklist to this grid square boundary, keeping a close eye, maybe doing a short one in here or just a stationary count, and then as I move into that final one, starting in another one, and then submitting them as I go at 1 kilometre intervals. So I'm just going to quickly show you now how to download Guru Maps and get the grid squares on there. So I'll just share my phone now. So to get to, well, Dan showed you before actually how you can download Guru Maps. So just go to, this will be on your phone, you'll be wanting to do this, not on your desktop. Going to the menu button up here and going to About. And then scrolling right down to the handbook and supporting material. Click on that. And there's a section there with grid square maps. If you just, on your phone, click on the Guru Maps there, that'll take you through to the Guru Maps page, and that'll show you how you can either download it for Android or iPhone. Once you've done that, you can download the grid square directly onto your phone just by clicking on this. So I'm going to do that now. That should automatically, yep, there you can see it's downloaded the grid square. So it's prompted me to download it. It's downloading now. And then I can click, this is for an iPhone, and I'm not quite sure how it works on an Android, but it should be pretty similar. You can click the open in. And so I've already got Guru Maps. I'm just going to select copy to Guru Maps, and that's going to automatically open it up. And if I zoom out there, you can see it's got all the grid squares on it. It's really good. We've tried this on multiple apps, and Guru Maps seems to be the best one at responding very fast. The other ones, when you zoom in, it's quite slow. And as you can see there, it's got my location, and if I turn my phone into airplane mode so it's no longer transmitting, well, I didn't actually think that one through because it's no longer transmitting, so you can't actually share it. What I was trying to show was that even with no cell phone reception, it's still showing me a location. So there I'm basically simulating a situation where I'm out in the bush and there's no cell phone reception. Didn't think that one through.
Yeah, so I've used Guru Maps in the Chathams, and there's no cell phone coverage at all there, and it's worked really great for telling me when I'm about to go into a new square and stuff. So yeah, it's a great app.
Yeah, and again, those maps aren't super detailed or anything, but it's a really useful tool for those situations where you know you're going to cross grid square boundaries and you're not quite sure at what point. So yeah, that does it for my section, and now I'm going to just pass it on to Mike, who's going to go over some atlasing tips and reminders.
Cool. Oh, well, yep, thanks, Pat. So I'm just going to quickly try to make sure I can do this. Which I think I can.
Yes, you can.
Yes. So yeah, we're just having a look at what atlasing might be like as we get out of lockdown. So all of the bird images here I've taken from New Zealand Birds Online, and as Dan's pointed out, it's a great resource. So I encourage everyone to explore that. So basically, firstly, I quickly want to remind everybody of the checklist golden rules. So all Atlas checklists should be complete checklists, which again is just trying to identify everything you can by sight or sound. And ideally, we're aiming for checklists that are between 5 minutes and 1 hour, but this is a guide. So, you know, we're not going to crack down if you do 1 hour and 20 or anything like that. And then for travelling lists, splitting those down to sections of 1 kilometre and less. So both the time and the distance on these are to give us better spatial and temporal scale on everything. So do bird numbers change during the day? Do their locations change during the day? And then give us better spatial spread when we're down to doing our occupancy mapping on this. And then, of course, the last key thing is that putting down accurate abundances. So not just ticking a presence or an absence, trying to give an accurate abundance. So for that flock of godwits there, it'd be giving your best guess on working out how many birds are there. So nocturnal checklists. Quite a few of our native species in New Zealand only come out at night. So it's really important that we do these to record more hawks and kiwis. eBird will automatically flag a checklist as nocturnal if it starts 40 minutes before sunrise or 20 minutes after sunset. So these will automatically be flagged as nocturnal lists. So what's really important is if you're starting a list near that time, when you think dusk is happening, that you stop a day list and then start a nocturnal list because they don't like being carried over. And then there's a heap more information on the eBird website about it. Nocturnal lists particularly are important even if you record 0. So I've done quite a lot of nocturnal lists at my house here, and probably only 1 in about 20 do I record a bird. I occasionally get little owl at my house. So particularly a nocturnal list's negative data saying that I don't have moorhawk, I don't have weka, and I don't have kiwi here are equally as important as recording the things that I do have. Oops, sorry, with the wrong mouse. So in New Zealand, we've got quite a range of cryptic species that in the past Atlas have been quite under-recorded. Things like fernbirds, marsh crakes, and things like that. So with these species, the use of playback or squeakers can be really useful in trying to find those, and we encourage their use. And if you do use playback or squeakers, we advise you to record this in your checklists. And I'll often use playback to particularly to get crakes. I've done quite a bit of crake hunting around Marlborough. And I will record a 0 next to marsh crake if I use playback, but then don't record one. And then I'll put in the comments that I used playback to try to call crakes, but didn't get them, because this has then given us that good negative data to say that we actually have looked for it, but didn't get it. One of the important things with playback is that you sort of follow the guidelines in it, which essentially is saying that use playback as little as you can. So don't go to a site and keep hammering and hammering, playing the tape so that birds get used to it or are alarmed by it and things like that. There's some good sources of bird calls. New Zealand Birds Online is an excellent one. The Macaulay Library, of course, through eBird, and the one Pat mentioned, which I've got lost from the top of my head now, and then hopefully very soon via the Merlin app, which we're helping Cornell develop for New Zealand. We're fairly lucky in New Zealand that we have a lot of public land with open access. Something like about 1/3 of the country is in dock reserves, which have open access. But obviously in the Atlas, there's still some significant areas of private land that we're keen to get into and survey. And these are really important that we do as well. The key here is always, always, always seek permission first before you go onto any private land. We all have some local contacts, and this is a time in the Atlas we're tapping into those local contacts to get onto some of that land is really useful. So this is where locals going to help more so than nationally led. Obviously, for everybody going out into the field, safety is paramount, and yep, we're absolutely keen for as much data as we can, but we want everybody to put their safety before the data. In New Zealand, we're a land of 4 seasons in one day, so keep a good eye on the weather forecast before you go, and particularly thinking about what impacts the weather's going to have for river crossings and for when you're in coastal situations, so heavy rain and really strong winds. These things also impact your birding as well as your safety. So check forecasts. Leave your intentions with your loved ones at home so they know where you're going, when you'll be back, so they can look up, check up on you if you're not back in an appropriate time. Then obviously the other one, is take appropriate clothing for the time of year. In the winter, that's going to be enough layers to stay warm. In the summer, that's going to be enough to protect you from sunstroke and sunburn and things like that. And then enough food and water for your time out. And then, of course, a first aid kit in your truck and a personal first aid kit carrying with you, especially if you're going out into remote places, and then appropriate communication for where you're going. Our team, for example, when we're going out into the back blocks with no cell phone, we all take a PLB with us. And then if we're relying on a GPS for telling us where we're going, then we always take spare batteries for that GPS as well. And then last and foremost, if you are driving and you see that falcon swooping past or anything, don't try to drive an Atlas at the same time. You absolutely shouldn't be using your phone, checking these apps and things like that as you're driving. So if you're ever doing Atlas checklists on the road, you should be getting out of your car and doing those. And obviously you're pulling over somewhere where it's safe to do that, and wearing appropriate high vis if you're on a road and things like that. So no using your phone and driving, team. So, with government's announced that we're heading towards level 3, and I'd like to remind everyone that that's not until Tuesday morning. So, the level 4 still means we're staying at home this weekend, unfortunately. And then essentially level 3 is pretty similar to level 4, that if we're not at work, school, or exercising, or out to get essentials, we should be staying home. Atlasing can be part of your exercising routine in your local area, and we do encourage you to put that in. Essentially, it looks like the government's guidelines on local is that you can drive up to about 45 minutes, so staying within your region and walking along the beach, and in most tracks are going to be open again. But please check your local council and DOC guidelines for your region and follow those. There's heaps of information on the government's COVID-19 website about this, so stay informed with what's happening, and then hopefully, like Jacinda's sort of hinted, we'll be in level 2 reasonably quickly and be a lot freer. So please follow those government guidelines at all times. We're all in this together, and the sooner we get through it and can start exploring some of the back blocks, the better. Cool. There was only, I think we're just about there, and then we were just keen to show one more thing on the on the website in the Explore data, because we weren't kind of really sure where it fitted in into any of the other sections, so everyone passed it on to me. So going on to the Explore data, and this is mostly really as it sort of puts a bit of competition out there. There's this Atlas Top 100. You can click on this, and basically you can compare how you're doing. As in the other functions here, you can type in New Zealand if you want all of New Zealand or a particular province. And then on this drop down, there's a range of different things you can do by species observed, complete atlas squares, or grid squares with complete checklists in them. So if we go to species observed and click that, and it will show you the top 100. So you can see me there. I'm currently 13th in the country for the number of species observed there. And Phil was absolutely crushing me on 179 species there. So let's do one which I'm doing a little bit better on, and go to grid squares with complete checklists on. And you can see there that I'm fourth. Although the ones that were had very good eyes at the beginning of this will notice that on my home page there, I was actually on 197, and we found a glitch in this system where this is not automatically counting the squares from the Chathams or the subantarctic islands for some reason. So I should actually be fair, but hey, who's counting? So yeah, it's just an interesting thing to be sort of seeing where you are ranking in the country for those people that are interested in that.
You're not at all, Mike, obviously.
I'm not at all, but you will notice there that I am beating most of my colleagues on the ones I showed you, and the one I'm not, I chose not to. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to stop for some questions. Obviously, we've rattled through quite a lot of information, so please just send your questions into the chat. And remember, just select all panelists and attendees, and we'll answer them as best as we can. Before anyone leaves, we do just want to mention that because this is the last planned Atlas webinar that we had, we're really, really keen to hear feedback from you guys, and we're going to be sending out a survey that's going to come probably tomorrow via Zoom, and we're also going to be sending it via our mailing list as well. So if you get duplications, just don't worry, just fill in one. Very, very simple. It will just be sort of, have you found these useful? What feedback, and potentially what other topics you'd like us to cover or go over again, because yeah, we're keen to use these going forward. Sweet, it's pretty quiet.
So we really appreciate everyone joining us for the last 4 weeks. We've all been learning this technology ourselves, to be honest, me more so than these 3 other young people. So it's been great to do that, and moving forward, I think it's going to be a great platform to do other ones outside of lockdown as well. So I really do encourage people to give us that feedback, good as well as bad, because that's the only way we're going to learn.
Yep. Oh, thanks for all the comments, guys. Really, really appreciate it. I'm glad that that you guys have enjoyed them. As Sherry's pointed out, so I usually try and get the recording up onto our YouTube channel around about Sunday. It usually works out just with downloading and processing it and uploading it. So all of those links are available via the portal. If you go to About and then click on Webinars, and then there'll be a link to the YouTube video. Awesome. Yeah, Pat's just put the link for Guru Maps into there as well. Again, you can do that through About, but if you're struggling, just feel free to send us an email. And yeah, really, really glad that people are enjoying these webinars.
So I think one of the things that's most important with this project, this project also wouldn't be, this project wouldn't happen with you guys out there collecting data for us. So we're a small part of it. And it absolutely relies on people now going out and submitting data. So even after this, we're here to ask questions. So if people, if in the weekend or next week when you're doing it, you hit some glitches, just contact us, flick us an email, and we're more than happy to keep talking through it, because without all you guys out there would be no Atlas.
Yep. Yeah, and if you want to if you missed last week as well, we kind of talked more about the bigger picture as well. So if you wanted to watch that one, that kind of, basically saying exactly what Mike's just said. Oscar's sent in a question as well, talking about Atlas-specific trips. Obviously, before all...
Dan, I might take this one, actually, because I was just talking to Bruce about this. So yeah, Bruce and I were discussing this yesterday, and it is something that in a post-lockdown world that Birds New Zealand is going to be looking at planning field trips, particularly to areas. You'll notice that some of the things Sam showed you, some of the areas with lower Birds New Zealand membership are struggling to get much atlasing done. So we're definitely going to be looking at doing some specific organising some specific atlas trips into those areas to help those areas be covered off. So yeah, watch this space, Oscar. There'll be more about that coming out in the months to follow.
Yeah. And yeah, it kind of links in with your question, Heather, as well, about, looking at doing surveys and inviting other members. We're really encouraging. This is a collective national effort. We want to be supporting each other, and by all means, getting in touch with other RRs and other groups, and popping over to other regions if they need help. It's a collective effort of the next. Well, we're nearly past the first year and into the second year now, so it's another 4 years. So we're going to really need each and every one sort of supporting each other and working together.
Yeah, it's something we were hoping to be discussing with all of the RRs at the conference and AGM, but of course, with that being cancelled, we're just starting to think about how we can get all RRs together, basically to have an Atlas discussion and meeting. Obviously, it's probably going to be on a platform like this, so is something that we're going to be hoping to do sometime around the middle of June.
Nicole is asking what an RR is. An RR is a regional rep within Birds New Zealand, which is the sort of body that this scheme is run by. So that's what an RR is. Shelley's asking, is there a way of contacting other atlases within the app or on the portal? And there isn't. And so what we recommended, this question was raised last week, and it's a good question. But there are lots of social groups like Birds Auckland, Birding Auckland. There's all sorts of birding groups on Facebook, and there's also the Birding New Zealand forum as well, which is a great resource. So there are other ways on social platforms of sort of touching base with birding groups across the country. So that would be the best bet. And of course, if you want any help with that, just ping us an email and we can try and help you out.
Yep, Paul, that's something we something we appreciate, and we know that regions will have on. So something why we're keen to chat to RRs about and definitely give some support around that. We've initially really focused on the first year of getting the project really well bedded in, and we're going to be using the AGM as the discussion to move all that forward. And now we'll probably do that online, and we're not going to let that one sit for another year and wait for the next AGM. We'll keep moving on it, Paul. So I hear your pain.
Catherine's asking, could there be a media release from us on a local level to encourage atlasing, and maybe there'd be a local event linked into this that people could go to use local Bird New Zealand groups to help? It's potentially something that could be done, but obviously at the minute it's not quite possible. But definitely touch base, send us an email, Catherine, and then we can kind of start the ball rolling, I guess, on that kind of stuff. What do you reckon, Mike?
So I think, Catherine, there's going to be a lot of scope for us to do some media stuff after year one. We're sort of starting to work on where we've got to so far. Got somebody working on some maps behind the scenes at the moment. And then sort of, plugging where we've got to and how we want the next 4 years to look. I think it's going to be a great opportunity to get some media coverage on that. So it will be something that we're looking at, and we can work with local RRs to do that regionally as well.
You can say something then, Mike.
They could get a Zimmer frame with one of those smartphone holders on it, you know? So, yeah. Yeah. We're supposed to be a serious scientific organisation here, everyone. Come on, come on.
It's going to be quiet, eh? As with all of the webinars, we'll stay on as long as the questions keep on coming. So if it goes pretty quiet,
that's our cue to leave.
Yeah. Gene, you mentioned why the eBird doesn't allow you to zoom in to see the checklists. Not quite sure what you mean. Does anyone know what Gene's meaning there?
The NZ, yeah, and someone wanted that NZ Birds Online too, actually. Oh, I see this has come up, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yep, Sherry. I'll just share my screen and show NZ Birds Online. I'm not quite sure about Gene's question. Is that showing? It should go Firefox. So Sherry, and for anyone else watching, so New Zealand Birds Online, so it's nzbirdsonline.org.nz. So you can either write that down or just, if you just Google NZ Birds Online, and it brings you to this page, and it's an absolute amazing resource, and you can search by the name here, whether it's common name, Latin name, or Maori name as well, and it will bring you up a heap of information. So say let's go with P Waka Waka. Excuse me. And then it brings up all of the information. You have access to photos, and you also have access to sounds, and just heaps of amazing information all on species, and lots of scientific references as well. So this is a great resource. So that's nzbirdsonline.org.nz.
Do you want to just highlight there, Dean, where the sound is again? Because it is a little bit...
Yeah, so if you're on this page and you kind of want sounds, then click on the little, looks like a little trumpet with lines coming out of it. Click that, it automatically goes there. And then on the right-hand side, you just click on the sound that you want or show more sounds. So let's go North Island Fantail Male Song. And it may say this. It'll say, if the player doesn't appear to be working for you, try this link. And then you just click on that. That's quite ear-splitting. So let's go back. So that's all available to you, and yeah, it's totally free, which is pretty amazing. Yep, thanks Oscar for coming in for joining us, and yeah, happy Atlasing. Sherry, yeah, it's not an app, but as you say, we are going to be doing some releases soon, so make sure you're following us on Facebook and also potentially signing up to the mailing list. Or checking the portal, because as Mike mentioned, we've been working with the Cornell team to be working on a really awesome app called Merlin, and we've helped work with them to create a New Zealand pack, and that will, same thing, will have photos, audio, and also has you can take photos of birds and use it to ID the birds as well, which is pretty amazing. So that's an app that's coming out very, very soon. So, but
I think Gene's meaning on the effort map, when you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on that, you never get down to individual lists, which you don't.
No. Like if you click on the squares and go to view more data, you can see information about the checklist there, but you can't see the actual checklist.
Yeah, and so that was what I was kind of trying to show Gene with the species maps, is you can get that rough gauge on the individual checklist within grid squares using a very common species. So that's something that you can use, but no, you can't, because that would be, I think it would just be like too intense for any computer to bring up. It would just be so much information that your computer would probably just say, see you later, I'm not even going to try and load all that information, because it's just, yeah, it might even make some computers go pop.
Yeah, so Gene, if you wanted to see that, yeah, you would have to go to eBird, not to the Atlas portal, because all of the Atlas lists are on the New Zealand eBird portal, and you could view them there by zooming in and doing that and sorting for time. Yeah. Or like Sam said, click on the square and it'll come up with a list of all checklists that are there, and then you can look through them.
Yep. Nicole's got a really good question. So she's saying, I'm really keen to do more, but struggling with the small bird sounds in the forest that are less common. And there's a few and I can't see them. So will these checklists be incomplete or just give it your best shot? Pat, do you want to answer that one?
No, he wasn't listening to you, Dan.
Yeah. I was looking at the effort map. I wasn't actually listening. What is it?
Yeah.
Dan, answer it.
You fire ahead, Dan.
No worries. So yeah, it's basically give it your best shot. But as we said, the definition of a complete checklist is everything that you are able to identify by sight and sound without intentionally leaving anything off. So with those small sounds that you can hear, they're likely to be a passerine species, which is a perching or singing bird, depending on the definition you want to use. So you could use that. So you could use passerine spur to say that you know there's kind of a few singing birds or small singing birds making some calls that you can't quite kind of gauge on and give a best estimate of how many. So that's 2 or 3, whatever. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like you're not going to be able to identify everything. You're not going to be able to detect everything. That's just virtually impossible for all of us. You know, you could be looking somewhere and something flies behind you and you're just never ever going to be able to detect that. So in terms of that, definitely aim for your complete list. And if you're putting in everything that you're able to identify by sight and sound, then that is a complete list. And as I say, with the, if there's a call or if there's a song that you can't quite get, then you just can put that down as a passerine spur. So that's P-A-S-S-E-R-I-N-E. But if you just put P-A-S-S, you'll see it come up and just put there. And you can put a little comment saying like, unable to identify further because I couldn't see the bird. And that's great. So just essentially, give your best shot and you'll find over time, I think all of us can agree here, we all start at the beginning where you don't know very much. And the more time you spend out there, the more time you sort of then trying to identify those calls, the better and more confident, more comfortable you will get. And that will just increase. But eBird's great at taking into count that wide range of observability. So just focus on your best effort. And ultimately we don't want it to be to the point that you don't enjoy your birding, but just your best shot.
And very soon, like we've mentioned a few times, we're working with Cornell on what's called the Merlin ID app. And we're hoping very, very soon, actually, that this is going to be out. And that will have sounds on it or from your phone, you'll be able to play on them. And it really is potentially something we'll probably run another webinar on once we launch that to get people up to speed with it. So I think that'd be a great thing for when you're in the field and you want to check what that possibly could be and putting it in. So, watch this space. Definitely follow us on Facebook, sign up to our newsletter because we'll be putting that out when it happens. So it's in the final stages of getting tweaked to be launched. So, yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Joanna. Take care and happy Atlassing. Thanks for joining us again. Thanks, Gene. Yeah, if there's any more questions, then keep them coming, guys, because we'll stay on. But if it starts drying up, then it is the weekend.
Long weekend.
Long weekend, yeah. Mike's got a beard to shave. Oh, Shelley, voice memos on iPhone. It depends on your configuration, but if you search for it, you can search for it on your iPhone. So if you swipe right, and then you'll be able to search for voice memos, and then you'll be able to open it from there. And the icon is, I don't know why. I always forget that you can share. I'll just share my phone. It's so much easier. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so the voice memos. So as I say, you can swipe right, and then you'll get this. And you can search in here for voice memos if you want, or it's available here. So I've just sorted it here, but this one here, that's the icon for it, and that's how I've been recording bird sounds and uploading them.
Cool, Dan.
I think that's us, eh?
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, look forward to your feedback.
Yep. Sweet. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.